Hello, this is Michelle at East Avenue Art, and today I'm doing something a little bit different. I did a staycation and ended up staying at a home that my parents used to own when I was a child. It's now been turned into an Airbnb, and the owner's done this amazing job with the backyard, creating a beautiful space with this pond and all kinds of gardening in the backyard. I was really inspired, and I decided to paint some of it. So I've done a few spreads so far. I was inspired by the lily and the lily pad, so I did this zoomed up painting with gouache. And then on the other side, I wanted something more illustrative and fun and to include the koi fish that I saw in the pond as well. And that's actually what I'm going to demonstrate in this. So I started just by sketching in the lily pads. They kind of look like Pac-Man, if you remember. Um, from maybe the 80s, that game Pac-Man. You just kind of do like a circle and then a little bit of a cutout, almost like a mouth. And I'm doing this in my Etchr Sketchbook. They did a collab with Arches watercolor paper. So this is really like nice quality paper, and it's thick. It's 140 pounds and cold pressed, so it's a little bit toothy. So there you see me just kind of sketching in the koi fish. And again, I sort of trusted myself to be able to draw this because it's not too complicated of a drawing. If something is more complex, I usually like to sketch it out on tracing paper or just sketchbook paper first before I transfer it into my sketchbook, because with the cotton paper that I'm working with, it doesn't really take too well to a lot of erasing. So, but I was pretty confident as I'm erasing some bits here. I was overall pretty confident with my sketching of sort of half circles and just sort of a fish shape. Um, and so, yep, there you go. I kind of just sketched out that, pretty easily. Oh, and I should also mention that I taped down my edges with some washi tape. I think I got that washi tape from Archer and Olive. And I'm starting in with mixing up my lily pad colors. So I mixed up a few different greens. Unlike the painting you see on the right side of my sketchbook, this is going to be watercolor, and I decided to go with something like a little bit brighter. And so I'm starting with the lightest color that I'm going to use. And the thing to remember with watercolor is that you really want to start with the lightest color first, because you can always add depth and shading. As you see, I'm doing that now, but you can't take it away. So, I kind of like to start a little bit conservatively. I think I felt like that was maybe a little too yellow to start, so I dropped in some olive green just to add a little bit of depth and shading to my lily pad. And then I came in with a sort of a brighter, sort of Kermit the Frog green or grass green. And I think that works because I wanted less realism and more just sort of like playful illustration in this piece. And so, yeah, you can see I'm just dropping in while the lily pads are still wet colors, and just kind of dropping them in, and using my brush to sort of guide the color around, because it's not as wet as it could be. Um, I actually feel like my paint was drying pretty quickly because I was sitting next to an open window in front of me as I was painting, and it was kind of windy, so I can see where the environmental factors were influencing my painting. Even though this isn't a plein air, it's still being a little bit affected by the outdoors. And so I mixed up a peach-ish gray for the base color of the fish. You can see I got it really watery. So what's interesting about this is, as the painting went on, the more I added color, like the color of the water, and I built up the color of the lily pads more, this color that I'm painting on sort of just completely fades into the background. It almost looks towards the end like the base color of the fish is white. And I think that's super interesting because it looks so dark to me. And at first blush, I'm like, was thinking that, the the paint is too dark, this isn't going to look good. So I think that's an interesting commentary on color and context. Once you add more color around something, it can look lighter than you thought it was going to be when it's just up against the white paper. And so there's no white paper by the end of this painting. All of the paper is covered with paint. So you can really kind of see the difference when you have paint next to just your white paper versus, colors all around it. What happens to your perception of that color? And then I'm going in now that that other lily pad has dried. I want those to be, distinct overlapping lily pads. So I waited for that one to dry before I started adding in some color there. And so I'm just kind of experimenting with different colors. I don't want the lily pads to look identical or the same. So I'm just kind of playing around with dropping in different colors and seeing what the effect is. Okay, so I mixed up a couple of different oranges for the orange that you see on the koi fish. And I want to point out that I waited for the base color of the fish to dry completely because I don't want the colors to blend. I want there to be a clear division between the base color, that peachy color, and then the orange color. And I'm also going to wait for that base orange color on the orange spots to dry before I add in the darker sort of orange or red blotches that you would see that kind of look more like the fish's scales, because I want that to be sort of a harsher distinction. So sometimes with watercolor, I kind of like to think about, do I want soft lines or harsh lines? And that's how I know whether I want to wait for the paint around it to dry or whether I want to do like wet into wet. So on the fish, I really mainly, actually exclusively did, waited for my paint to dry before I went in with more paint. So, one decision that I made early on is that I didn't want this to be super realistic looking. I wanted it to look kind of just illustrative and playful. And if you noticed in the beginning when I was showing my pictures of the koi fish in the pond, you can barely see them because the water's sort of brackish. And on the other side, you can see I went with that brackish look of the water, but I chose not to do that with this particular painting because I wanted to just, highlight the fun colors like the orange and blue is a really nice color to go with orange. They're complementary colors. They sit opposite on the color wheel. So I wanted this to be a little bit just sort of like visually pretty as opposed to sort of realistic-ish looking. And so, the fish doesn't totally look underwater because the water is going to be, I'm trying to go for sort of a clear effect, which you don't typically have in ponds and backyards. So I mixed up a bunch of different blues, but I'm going with this base um, kind of sky blue color as my lightest color. And then sometimes I drop in some of the darker blues from my palette just to add a little bit of variation. And I think it ended up with like a really pretty effect of just doing a bunch of different blues. And in some places, I wanted to do some sense of realism. So you'll see I'll kind of do some shadows underneath the lily pads, and I'll do a shadow underneath the koi fish later as well with an indigo blue, just to kind of give somewhat of a perfection. And I'm not worried too much about the color blooms. I'm just kind of like trying to get a base color blue in here that's pretty, and especially against the orange of the fish and the green lily pads. So I think this kind of ended up cute and very different stylistically from the other painting I did on the other side of my palette. And one other thing I want to mention is I think it's really important to feel comfortable to move your sketchbook around as you're painting to get the angle that you like. So you can see as I'm going around doing that detail work around the fish, and around the lily pads, then I'm moving my sketchbook, I'm flipping it around just to make sure that I'm getting the angle, the best angle to paint the way I want to. So, feel free to move your sketchbook or the paper, whatever you're painting on, around. Um, that's definitely something I like to do. I try not to tape down if I'm working on a sheet of watercolor paper. If I'm tempted to tape it down because I think it's going to take a lot of water and I'm worried about it buckling, I'll tape it down to like a clipboard so that I can still move around how I want to achieve the angles while I paint. So at this point, I decided to speed it up a little bit more just because I keep kind of adding layers to the water. I wanted to darken up the areas where the lily pads were hanging out, just because there's going to be, they would naturally be casting a shadow. So I waited for my pond water to dry and then I went in with indigo and painted um, the fish's shadow onto the pond floor, slightly off. You can see it's like slightly, incongruous, I think, with the area that the fish is taking up, because you would see it reflecting somewhat differently or off kilter on the pond floor. So I sort of took that approach. And you can see I did I kept the little like horns that they have at the front of their mouth, the whiskers or whatever those are. And I did the tail kind of going off to the side. And then I decided to go in with that same color and sort of paint around the lily pads and give them a little bit of a shadow onto the pond floor as well. And I wasn't always happy with the harsh lines that I would get, so I'd put in a little bit of clean water and then I would drop in the paint. I tried doing that and I still wasn't super happy with how harsh the lines were. So you can see, like, I'll go in there with a somewhat damp brush and just try to sort of scrub and even out um, the edges so it doesn't seem like such a harsh edge, like an obvious stroke. I'm trying to get it to look like a little bit more naturally, and so I try to buff out the areas where I've added in that shadow. I think it kind of works well. The only area that I really wanted a harsh line was from the fish. Um, and so I've tried to do that approach with each one of the lily pads, and I kind of go in carefully with a little bit of a thicker consistency of paint in the center and in small areas where it would be more, it would be a darker shadow, I think, because less light is getting down underneath those lily pads. Okay, so in here, like I mentioned, I wanted that orange, that base orange on the koi fish to dry before I went in with the sort of darker, redder blotches that almost look like fish scales. And I'm just kind of haphazardly putting those in, but that I think adds a little bit of texture to that fish. In the meantime, I had also gone in with a little bit of a thicker consistency on that fish of that base color, and I put in a dorsal fin, and I added a little like bit of detailing on its other fins and its tail. But like I said, you can kind of see how light the fish looks compared to the water around it, and also the orange part of the fish. So I was a little bit less happy with that, and at various points I tried to build up that color, but that's kind of what I was talking about sort of earlier in this video, of how it looked, how that color looked very sort of deceiving when you just had the white paper next to it. So here I'm just going to go in with some darker olive greens and kind of have like a little bit of more depth and different kind of colors. Like obviously as a plant, it's not going to be all sort of one flat color. So I try to go in with my brush and just add in some more like olivey green just to add some visual interest. And at this point, I'm ready to start using a little bit of my gouache. This is predominantly a watercolor painting, but to achieve the effect of the water droplets on the lily pads, I need a little bit of white paint, opaque white paint, and gouache has the opacity to go over watercolor, right? And with white at least, and you can see it, sort of over. Whereas if I tried to take watercolor white paint, I would not be able to have this level of opacity to cover up color like this, as you see I'm doing. So I'm just kind of outlining where I would like all of the drops of water that you would have sort of sitting, collecting on the lily pads. You kind of see I did on my other lily pad the same thing. I have the white as kind of sort of like a highlight, and sometimes I scribble in a little bit of white in the center as well. And then I will build up some color around this, but I kind of actually like to start with the white, even though I'm gonna cover up a lot of the white with darker paint. And I'll do that also with some of those darker greens and brown mixes that you see on my gouache palette. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit because I am being redundant at this point. Now that I have the highlights where I want, I'm going to start adding in some darker gouache around those highlights to just sort of add a shadow underneath where the puddles would be. So I try to do some little like shadows on the sides of the white, and then at some points I'll cover up even where the white was, just to kind of the white really served as an outline for me, but you wouldn't see white necessarily all around. So I'm just gonna keep building up the color. And the way that I got this sort of olivey color, you can't really see it too well on my palette. Well, actually, I'm going in a little bit with the white because I think some of the white faded. Um, so I added some green and a little bit of red. Red sits opposite of green on the color wheel, and so you can mix a little bit of red in with green to deepen the color actually, and to give a good shadow color for, green is what sits opposite on the color wheel. And that's kind of true of all of the colors if you look at the color wheel. Um, and I suggest Googling that if you're kind of new to that. So I was kind of going along and just filling in around where I have the white highlight, the white gouache, and just kind of adding a little bit of shadows. And so this takes a little bit of time because you just sort of have to do it on site. I decided I wanted to do a water, a little bit of water puddle there as well, or droplets there. But so I'll have to go in with the white gouache later to finish that out. But so I just kind of play around. I do this by feel and look, and at some points I'll cover up some of the white that's there, but I'm just trying to give it this sort of like effect of a 3D, which is really hard to do actually. And you can see I did it pretty well on the the pads, the lily pads to the right, my gouache lily pad that you see there. But I kind of it's even hard to reproduce it the next day. And oh, see, you can see I'm mixing up some green and some red to get that nice sort of like olivey shadow color that I'm just playing around. And so you see I haven't even touched the upper lily pads yet because I'm just still working out how I want this to look. It really does take a lot of trial and error. Fortunately, I find gouache pretty forgiving because it's like, well, if I don't like it, if I don't like what I have, I can just sort of paint over it. So I sort of like that a lot about gouache and about acrylics. You get a little bit more forgiveness sometimes than watercolor. So this isn't a purely watercolor painting. It's actually a little bit of gouache mixed in to sort of finalize it. And I could have just left it, I didn't have to add the puddles on the lily pads, but I just think they look so cool if they're done right. And you can see I'm still just sort of working it out and trying to add my color and um, vary the color of green that I'm using so it does look natural. Um, and yeah, I just kind of keep working through it and keep moving around to the lily pads. So this part takes like a while, and I don't really have great advice other than to just take a step back. Like, I think at this point, I stood up. Usually I'm sitting when I paint, but I, for various points, would stand up so I could see it from above and sort of make a decision about whether I liked how it looked. So that's maybe one suggestion I would give, is just kind of to get a different perspective and look at it from above, like a different angle to see if you like it. And so if I'm finally getting to these top lily pads and trying to add the shadow color there too, and trying to smudge it a little bit so it looks somewhat like a puddle naturally occurring. And I'm going in some more with that white there to add some more highlights in that one area, but I'm still not happy with this. So it takes a little while to get it where you want it. I didn't end up being quite as happy with this one as I was with the one on the right hand side, but it's funny that I can't quite reproduce it. But here I'm trying to do like the sort of the edging of the lily pad to give it somewhat of a 3D look. And so I did that with sort of a brownish green, more towards brown than even olivey. And I ended up not loving that, so I did get some more green on my brush and sort of went over it again to just sort of soften that brown because it felt a little bit too brown. And I'm sorry my forehead got in there. I just can't help it sometimes. So I'm continuing to add this sort of olivey edge to the lily pads, and I do think it gives me a nice like sense of perspective, 3D look to them. But you can see I went in later with a clean brush and kind of tried to soften the harsh line. I don't like harsh lines, especially with plants and like things from the natural world. That's just not how you don't really see harsh lines like that, right? You usually see colors kind of blending into each other. And so what I did was like I went in with a damp brush and a clean damp brush, and I just kind of like scrubbed a little bit to just sort of like blur the line between the brown and the green. And at this point, I went in with like a little bit more green on my brush and just sort of painted over that brown and then added that green around the area just to kind of give it more of a softer look, um, so that um, it wasn't quite a harsh line. And so I'm going to do that with all of the lily pads that I've worked on so far, and I think that looks a little bit more sort of natural. Okay, and I'm going to do the same process on the remaining lily pads, where I'm just going to like do a little bit of an edging to that to show that there's sort of like a side to the lily pad. It's like a little bit thicker. It's more of a 3D sort of thing. And I'm going to do that to the top lily pad as well, but also being careful to not have too harsh of a line. So eventually I'm going to smudge that out with some clean water as well, so it kind of has the similar vibe as the other lily pads. And there I go with a clean brush, clean damp brush, and I just kind of like, yeah, smudge that out. So it's not quite a harsh line, but you can kind of see that there's a little bit of an edge there. So at this point, I also wanted to add a little bit more of that indigo color to the shadows. Now that the water has dried, that's kind of funny to say, but the painting part of the water has dried. So I wanted to sort of like add a little bit more depth to the shadows up there towards the top. It just looked a little bit better to me that way. Okay, and at this point, I got some more of my white gouache out, and I wanted to do some like little ripples around. You can see I kind of did ripples on the other side with the lily pads on the right hand side, but I also wanted to do some ripples on this one as well, and white gouache is a great way to sort of achieve that look. So I did some little ripples around the lily pads and also around the fish as he's swimming through the water. So I just kind of did some little like white around his tail and his fins and the front of his body, and then I tried to add some more around the lily pads just to kind of add a little bit of, this is water, so it's like obviously moving. So I thought that was kind of a fun detail to add. White gouache is one of my favorite tools for this. And so these ripples are sort of the final little bit. And you can see I took off the washi tape, and this is my final piece. So I hope you enjoyed watching this, and please hit like and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Thanks so much for watching.